welcome to Arts Roll Call, a podcast showcasing artists and arts organizations, highlighting the role of the arts today in Greater Lansing. I'm Robin Miner Swartz. I'm an editor, communications consultant, and a lifelong arts advocate. And today I'm talking with Dustin Hunt. Dustin is a Michigan-based artist specializing in large-scale murals across communities nationwide. Before he earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts and Teaching certification from Michigan State, Dustin's experiences as a hip-hop DJ and graffiti artist significantly shaped his creative and educational practices. In 2017, Dustin founded Muralmatics, a platform offering community-based mural camps for middle and high school students, commissioned murals for clients, and paid apprenticeships for emerging artists. Some of his notable projects include the Si Se Puede mural in Lansing, honoring the legacy of migrant workers and Old Town's history. Dustin also co-founded and directed Lansing's Below the Stacks Mural Festival, attracting internationally acclaimed street artists for a week-long citywide event. His collaborative approach to public art emphasizes amplifying cultural narratives and fostering community pride. Dustin has received numerous grants, including the 2024 Arts Impact Grant from the Arts Council of Greater Lansing and the 2022 Grit Fund Project Grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. He's participated in artist residencies and showcased his work at mural festivals across the state. Dustin's dedication to using art as a catalyst for social change continues to inspire curiosity, learning, and discovery within communities. Dustin, welcome to Arts Roll Call. Thanks so much for being here with us today.
Hey, Robin, thanks for having me. Y'all have had some wonderful guests in the past, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're really happy to have you here. Let's start by talking, when did art first become a way of expression for you? What were your early experiences with the arts like that led you here?
So my earliest experience with art was just drawing in elementary school. It sounds really simple, but I went to four different elementary schools in four
Mm.
different cities. And I could just draw intuitively. I don't remember any sort of art class. It was just off of observation. I was able to draw. And in that, I realized that this was a way to impress my classmates, which at that time, as a kid, like always the new kid,
Hmm.
that was a little bit like a superpower for me. And then I knew I could kind of bring that to other schools, and I'd have this reputation as the kid who can draw really well. Um, I think a side note to that, I don't remember art programming. I don't remember art projects, art teachers, like K through 8. I just
Oh,
don't
wow.
remember. There wasn't um, there either wasn't programming or the impact was pretty pretty minimal, which I think in turn kind of became the catalyst for my own pursuits towards art education.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when did you first get into graffiti art? How does your work as a DJ fit into that too?
When I was in middle school, my mom was actually a student at Michigan State University. She was studying interior design, and she
Mhm.
had an eclectic group of friends from a bunch of different worlds, not just Michigan State.
Mhm.
And one of her friends was into graffiti and brought a book to our house. This is pre-internet times, and it was West Coast graffiti. And this was like my first exposure to it, and I,
Mhm.
opened it up, and it was my brain just exploded. It was just wildest, most colorful, intriguing, creative thing I'd ever seen. And there was an element or a sense of lawlessness in it all that
Mhm.
also kind of appealed to me. And so I was fully intrigued. And coupled with that, at the time, hip hop music was getting passed down to us from older kids.
Mhm.
Um, and then also, some folks know this, but 89 FM, and there's still a version of it, but at the time, Michigan State student station, they had a hip hop show that played uncensored, like new releases of hip hop albums and songs, and they were breaking artists like Wu-Tang Clan and
Mhm.
Outkast and Diggable Planet. So I was hearing like the first take on late night Saturday radio and dubbing this onto cassette. So I think these things kind of coupled together with the first exposure to graffiti, and then these just little bits of hip hop music that I was getting, um, really started to draw me in. When I was in high school, we moved again to Southfield. And so
Mhm.
being so close to Detroit, I started seeing graffiti in real life. And
Yeah.
this just continued to pull me in. And something I loved was that I love this about graffiti that you need access points into it. You need to know someone that's involved. You need to know where to go. You need to know the etiquette, the history, or else you could do something foolish or dangerous.
Yeah.
And in high school, I met some classmates. They knew just a little bit more than I did. And so we were able to kind of learn together. And it's like I got some access into this world. And yeah, it drew me in. And then I had a partial scholarship to Center for Creative Studies out of high school. So I was going from Southfield to Detroit to go to art classes, but along the way I kept seeing new graffiti. And one day I was like, let me just exit here and explore a little bit and skip this one class. And then that snowballed into I didn't make it through through the first semester at CCS because I discovered this whole other world.
Mhm.
um, I think in terms of just this fitting in with being a DJ, so as I'm learning the art form of graffiti, kind of embedded with that is the music of hip hop music.
Mhm.
So I'm starting to just hear things that aren't on the radio. It's not really common knowledge. These are things you have to dig for a little bit.
Mhm.
And so this whole other world is kind of opening up on my radar, um, until I saved up enough money to buy turntables and records and a mixer to kind of start exploring that as well. And I think both of these things they fit well for my personality. I'm especially when I was younger, I was painfully shy. I'm reserved. I'm an introvert, and all of these things lend themselves well to being a graffiti artist. If you're trying
Mhm.
to work discreetly and anonymously, you're not trying to be seen and
Mhm.
heard, and but you're still trying to make an impact.
Mhm.
And similarly with just being a DJ, like you're behind the music. You're not the front person. You're not in the center of the cipher. You're not breaking. You're not rapping. You're kind of behind the scenes a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I think all that stuff just kind of paired very well together, and I just got lost in it. I had kind of a full circle moment when I finally kind of got some things together, went back to Michigan State to pursue art education, and I took over that radio show for the host. He
Oh.
was leaving, so I started to host the show that meant so much to me as a kiddo, and I got to meet all these Michigan hip hop artists. I got really plugged into the Lansing hip hop scene at the time. Um, yeah, and I just was able to totally nerd out on hip hop, and yeah, had a cool outlet for it.
That's really great. So how does that then, you mentioned a little bit about Michigan State. Can you tell us how that kind of evolves into becoming an art teacher, and what kind of work were you doing in that realm?
Yeah, so I got certified through Michigan State as an art teacher. I did my student teaching at Lansing Everett.
Mhm.
My mentor teacher was Pam Collins. She's a beloved art teacher in Lansing. Um, as a student teacher, I was always looking for these bridges between the classroom and the real world.
Mhm.
Um, one of the projects I did as a student teacher, I curated an art show for our students to show their work at a sneaker boutique that was in Old Town at the time.
Oh,
So
I
I taught
remember
a
that.
yeah, premiere. So I taught a traditional method of linoleum block printing,
Mhm.
um, but the lesson also incorporated the students' interest in shoes. And they had the understanding that this was going to get shown at this place that was, it was just sweet. It was a sweet little shop, and they gave us permission to use their walls to display things.
Mhm.
So it was kind of this mix of traditional art forms, students' interests, and then this real world context where like this is also a business that we're about to bring our art into. So
Mhm.
we want it to look good, we want it to look fresh. Um, so I was always just trying to find these bridges between that really that kind of it's kind of funny, like bridges that got me out of the classroom
Mhm.
with students to kind of have them experience and feel the impact of creativity out in the world and not just in the classroom.
That's really cool. So then how does that evolve into Muralmatics? Where did that idea come from?
I spent about this is my second teaching job. It was out in Portland, Oregon. I spent 4 years working at what the school district considered the alternative school.
Okay.
And this was a nonprofit. We served young folks 18 to 24 who were experiencing homelessness.
Mm.
This was like a drop-in center so they could get all their hygiene needs met, cafeteria, drop-in classroom or school with a GED tutoring lab, and
Mm.
then some employment resources upstairs and some social workers, counselors, like really a whole wraparound team of folks trying to support students who they were like out of resources. Their
Mhm.
families were out of resources. Like if they made it to us, they made it through a series of checkpoints to see if
Mm.
they had any other way before they made it to us. So I'm working with them, and my job was lead teacher. There was one teacher for this little school, and it was me. And the
Wow.
students didn't even have to be there. So I had to design lessons that were relevant, engaging, entertaining, meaningful. And in this, I facilitated lots of stencil making workshops,
Mm.
reading and writing groups, basketball games. I had access to a van, and so we took field trips to Multnomah Falls. I took students to working artist studios, Buddhist temples, Chinese gardens. We did a sweat lodge on the side of a mountain, like pretty wild, um, fun things that I got to do with students.
Mhm.
Um, but there was this thing that happened where I was working closely with one particular student and helping him get his GED. And so he's going from couch to couch or shelter to the street, back and forth, just trying to survive.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, he's showing up every day to get tutored so he can get his GED. So he has this drive and commitment that is just admirable.
Mhm.
Um, and one day he's late, and it just wasn't like him. So I just asked him. He wasn't wrong. He was just late, and it was unusual. So I asked him what was going on. He's like, "Oh, got caught up in community service. Like the guy, he let us off late." And I was like, "Okay, okay. Like, what'd you have to do for community service?" And he said he had to pick up trash around the city of Portland.
Mhm.
And I'm like thinking, that's unfortunate because like I know you have goals right now, and
Mhm.
this is morning time. Like you should be able to be in school. And then I asked him what led to the community service, and he says he got caught up because he couldn't pay for a transit ticket to ride the train, and so that
Mhm.
turned into a large fee. I think like a $200 ticket.
Mm.
Couldn't pay the ticket, so he misses that. That gets rolled into he needs to go to court. He doesn't make the court date. That rolls into serving community service.
Mhm.
Um, and hearing this story, I just got livid. And with the student, I'm keeping my cool. We finish
Mhm.
up tutoring, but I walk away thinking like, who designs a system like this that punishes someone for not having $3 to
Right.
ride the train?
Yeah.
Knowing this young person's circumstances, knowing his drive, I was livid, and it was out of that moment where I was thinking, what can I do that could be considered community service for folks to engage in, but also builds up the folks who are engaging in the service. So it's not
Mhm.
just this meaningless task that public works should be doing that anyways.
Yeah.
And so it was out of that, and just having a bit of background in graffiti, working with spray paint, and just thinking of finding ways to draw all these elements together, kind of eventually led to Muralmatics.
I had no idea that was the backstory. That is really, really fascinating, because what I see it to be now is something that has really evolved along the way. So can you talk a little bit about how it has evolved and where it is today?
Yeah, for sure. So again, I credit Muralmatics, like the impetus to the students I was working with in Portland. They kind of like pushed me in a way, and I learned and grew in ways I didn't anticipate. But also out there, Mercy Corps, they offered a business class. It was like Business 101. And coming from the world of education, where there's actually, I should say, just someone that struggles working within the confines of the system of public education, um, jumping into a business class that was just, 1 + 1 is 2. And if you want this result, you do XYZ. I was like, let's go. So I took a great business class with all these other creative entrepreneurs, developed a bit of a roadmap. Um, and then soon after this, I had all this stuff ready to go. My partner and I, we had to move back to the Midwest, but we ended up in Minneapolis because she's from Nebraska, I'm from Michigan, and we were like, what's kind of in the middle and doable, and also a thriving city. So we're in Minneapolis for a few years, um, and then I made it back to Lansing after a few years of living and working in Minneapolis. Um, Tried out a couple pilot projects when I got here, and really was just trying to figure out like how to actualize some of the stuff I had come up with in this brainstorm and this roadmap on paper. Um, and it was after a couple pilot projects, and then other mural work caught the attention of someone from Dwight Rich,
Mm.
um, and so they pulled all the funding together, and I consider that like the first official project of Muralmatics, where we painted an entire wall from end to end, top to bottom, with all spray paint.
Hmm.
Um, and this project was really kind of my new roadmap moving forward. This was 2021, summer of 2021. So it was also the first time that our students were meeting face to face in person. And this
Yeah.
is a small group of students. And right away, what became evident was that students needed to process grief, and we
Hmm.
needed to hold the space for that to happen. And so I just I met the perfect assistant I brought into the project, who was experienced in leading yoga workshops. So the first 20 minutes of our mural workshops, it was a yoga class, and so it was
Hmm.
all about just kind of checking in with ourselves, checking in with our surroundings, um, and really setting a certain intention for the day that was about being in the space. And then out of that, let's work,
Hmm.
which is just different than any sort of classroom setting you have.
Hmm.
Um, we did walking meditations. The wall that we worked on was an abandoned school.
Mm.
So there are wildflowers everywhere, birds, bugs. It's way on the south side. It's really quiet, except for the noises of nature. I was like, man, this is perfect. Like, what a space to have students, kind of unreal from 2 years of doing school online. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, it was really sweet. And that first project really kind of um, led the way for what mural camps are today.
Hmm.
Um, and I think this story kind of sums it up well. Where the first day of camp, to one of the students, I asked them, "Hey, what brought you to mural camp?" And their response is like so middle school. They say, "My mom made me be here." And I was like, "Okay." in the back of my head, I was like, it's all good. Like, we're going to do 2 weeks of spray paint on ladders. They're going to have a great time. I already knew this, so I'm not phased. Um, the student goes on, they love the project. Um, they meet friends, they get to like their ideas are embedded into the project. It's really cool. But later I learned through the mom shared that their child had taken a picture from the same place since day one. So they had this perfect time lapse of the
Oh,
project.
wow.
And I was like, okay, like they were really invested in it.
Hmm.
Um, and then after that project, they reached out and to see about future projects and were had been part of other mural camps as well.
That's so cool. So you mentioned funding related to this a little bit, and so obviously funding is a big part of your work when it comes to creating these opportunities and these public art projects. I know you've gotten some grants from the Arts Council. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship with them and about some of the grants that you've received to do this work?
Yeah, the Art Council provides lots of resources for artists. I think especially budding artists. Um, so my pilot projects, I think I did a pilot project with communities and schools. They had an office based out of Sexton.
Hmm.
And so CIS, they helped write for a grant that the Art Council had. So we kind of did this partnership thing where I was providing programming. They had capacity to do some grant writing and a nonprofit status. We applied for the grant together with the Art Council and got funded for that. That was an early pilot project.
Hmm.
Um, so I think for me, I kind of do this thing where like I feel like Muralmatics is a big idea, but to get there, I had to focus in on some smaller projects to help me figure out how to execute the bigger project.
Hmm.
And for me, I found that the Art Council, they have these grants that have helped me kind of with the smaller ideas, like kind of get those things out into the world
Hmm.
through some of the grants that they have that end up leading to larger projects with more substantial funding and other community partners buying into them and supporting projects. Um, yeah, so the Art Council has been great. And with those pilot projects, I tell young artists this all the time. They were hardly funded, but the impact that they had and the amount of learning that I got out of it was worth more than anything,
Hmm.
because that became the way for me to get to these other big ideas that I had.
Hmm. Well, speaking of grants, earlier this year you received the 2024 City of Lansing's Arts Impact Project, and you've been getting quite a bit of media attention for that work. Can you share a little of the details about that project and how that's coming along?
Yeah, for sure. So this was a big idea that I had been proposing for a couple of years, and I'm so excited it was selected this year. We're at about 75% completion with it. My goal is to officially unveil or launch it in October. The
Hmm.
project is called Lansing Shaped, and it's a citywide interactive mural project representing three generations of Lansing residents. The three portrait murals each depict a different generation. So we have children, parents, grandparents,
Hmm.
and each will be painted on a former Lansing School District building in three different parts of town. So the north side, the west side, the south side. And when a viewer approaches a mural, they'll notice a QR code prominently displayed near the mural, scan the QR code, and they're going to get dropped into a conversation. And they don't see like the full conversation. So they're going to hear from one or two of the family members talking about how Lansing has shaped them, and then they'll
Hmm.
get some prompts on how they can participate. Um, so we share how they can record a video of themselves, where to drop it, and that'll end up being added to a gallery for other future viewers that they'll see when they begin scanning the QR codes. And then they'll get some instructions on where the other murals are around town and how to visit them. So the goal is to really get folks moving through the city, and then also sharing how Lansing has shaped them while they're, also looking at these former Lansing school districts. So there's elements of history and
Mhm.
just getting folks into different neighborhoods, and an element of participation that I'm probably the most excited about. Like, I get to paint some really big murals that are gonna, that's fun. But
Mhm.
I'm mostly excited about the public and the viewers and how they start recording, sharing, participating in the project.
Well, and that's like the definition of placemaking. That what you're talking about is creative placemaking, and I know that's important to you, that's important to the Arts Council. What does placemaking mean in terms of your work with Muralmatics?
Personally, I'm drawn to placemaking that inspires awe. Maybe it's some form of creative or social intervention. There's an element of authenticity. Somehow it enhances people's lives, and it's driven by creatives. And so at Muralmatics, that's what I strive to incorporate into each project.
Mhm.
Um, for me, and again, this is just my background where I came from, one of the most interesting and talked about public art events of the past 10 years, I would say it happened organically and at the hands of graffiti artists this past winter. I don't know if you remember, but there are some abandoned towers in Los Angeles that were completely covered in graffiti. Like, this
Mhm.
news went global. I had folks just from the past, from all over, reaching out, calling, texting, saying, "Have you seen this?" And I'm like, for me, I already know the power of graffiti and what
Mhm.
that looks like. But I think this event also, it got people talking about housing. It got people
Mhm.
talking about these developers and how they were able to just abandon all this material. And it had folks talking about the environmental impact.
Mhm.
Um, and the folks at the root of that event were graffiti artists.
Mhm.
So projects like that include all those things. I just find them to be really interesting, and that's what I strive for in the Muralmatics projects.
Thanks for that. That's a really interesting perspective, and I love that it helps people think much more deeply about what a mural and what graffiti is and can be and does in any kind of a space where it shows up.
For
Well, is there
sure.
anything else that you'd like to share with us about the work you're doing?
Again, I'll just go back to Lansing Shaped. When viewers, listeners, however you're hearing, seeing this, I'd love for you to check out Lansing Shaped once it's launched, hopefully October. And I'd love for viewers to participate, checking out the murals, adding their stories to the overall project, and just being a part of Lansing Shaped.
Well, that's a great thing to end on. Thanks so much for joining us today, Dustin. I really enjoyed hearing your story and the story of Muralmatics. Thanks so much for spending time with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I'd also like to take a moment to remind everyone that this year the Arts Council is celebrating their 10th annual Creative Placemaking Summit. That's happening October 10th and 11th. So to learn more about it and register to attend, you can visit lansingplacemakers.org. This podcast has been a production of the Arts Council of Greater Lansing. To learn more about them, go to lansingarts.org.